The thunderous crack of bone against wood echoed across the dusty arena as another cowboy hit the ground hard, his dreams of taming the legendary stallion shattered along with his ribs. Blood trickled from Maverick Holloway's split lip as he spat dirt and glared up at the magnificent black horse that stood triumphant in the center of the corral, nostrils flaring, eyes wild with defiance. "That's the 7th one today," muttered Sheriff Quentin Bridgewater, adjusting his weathered hat as he watched the paramedics tend to yet another broken rider. The horse, a magnificent specimen locals had dubbed Thunder's Revenge, pawed the ground with hooves that seemed to strike sparks from the earth itself. No brand marked his sleek coat. No rope had ever held him long enough to matter. He was pure wilderness incarnate, a living symbol of everything the frontier represented before civilization tried to cage it. The stallion had appeared 3 months ago, seemingly from nowhere, terrorizing ranches across Copper Canyon County. He'd stolen mares, trampled fences, and led entire herds into the Badlands where no man dared follow. Every attempt to capture him had failed spectacularly. Ropes snapped like thread, corrals couldn't contain him, and riders ended, up exactly like Maverick, bruised, bloodied, and thoroughly humbled. $50,000, announced Cattle Baron Cornelius Fairweather, his voice carrying across the crowd of spectators gathered around the makeshift arena. $50,000 to the man who can ride that devil for 8 seconds. The sum was staggering, enough to buy a small ranch or set a man up for life. It had drawn every hotshot rider from 3 states, each convinced they possessed the skill to succeed where others had failed. Sheriff Bridgewater had seen enough broken bones for one day. The horse wasn't just wild. There was something almost supernatural about his ability to read riders, to anticipate their every move and counter it with devastating effectiveness. Thunder's Revenge seemed to take pleasure in the challenge, as if each failed attempt only proved his superiority over the humans who dared oppose him. As the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the assembled crowd, painting everything in shades of gold and amber, a lone figure appeared on the horizon. The stranger rode slowly toward the arena on a dusty palomino, his silhouette wavering in the heat like a mirage. Unlike the flashy cowboys who'd tried their luck earlier, this man wore simple clothes, faded denim, a plain leather vest, and boots that had seen countless miles of hard country. The crowd barely noticed him at first, too focused on placing bets and arguing about the next challenger. But Sheriff Bridgewater found himself studying the newcomer with growing interest. There was something in the man's posture, the way he sat his saddle with unconscious grace, that set him apart from the attention-seeking rodeo stars who'd been dominating the day's failures. Thunder's Revenge had noticed him, too. The stallion's head lifted, ears pricked forward, as if recognizing something in this quiet stranger that the others had lacked. For the first time all day, the great horse stood perfectly still, muscles coiled but not with aggression, with curiosity. The stranger dismounted and approached the corral fence, his movements unhurried and confident. He said nothing to the crowd, made no boastful claims or demands for attention. Instead, he simply stood there, studying the magnificent creature that had humbled so many before him, his weathered hands resting lightly on the top rail of the fence. The stranger's name was Ezekiel Crestwood, though he offered it to no one and expected nothing in return. He'd spent the better part of his 43 years moving from place to place, never staying long enough to call anywhere home. His reputation preceded him in some circles, whispered stories of a man who could speak to horses in their own language, who understood the wild things that others sought only to break and dominate. Sheriff Bridgewater approached him cautiously, recognizing something in the man's weathered features that spoke of hard-won wisdom. "You thinking about trying your luck with that demon?" he asked, nodding toward Thunder's Revenge, who continued to watch Ezekiel with an intensity that made the lawman's skin crawl. Ezekiel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he climbed over the fence with fluid grace and walked directly toward the center of the corral. The crowd fell silent, sensing that something different was about to unfold. This wasn't another cocky cowboy looking to make a name for himself. This was something else entirely. Thunder's Revenge snorted and tossed his magnificent head, but he didn't charge. Instead, the stallion circled Ezekiel at a distance of about 20 feet, his movements wary but not hostile. The horse's ears swiveled constantly, reading every nuance of the stranger's body language, searching for the aggression and dominance that had characterized every other encounter. "Easy, brother," Ezekiel murmured, his voice barely audible to the crowd but carrying clearly to the horse's sensitive ears. "I'm not here to break you. I'm here to understand you." The words seemed to puzzle Thunder's Revenge. He slowed his circling, lowering his head slightly as if trying to process this unprecedented approach. No human had ever addressed him as an equal before. They'd all come with ropes and spurs and the burning desire to prove their mastery over nature itself. Ezekiel began to move in a slow circle of his own, mirroring the horse's pattern, but in the opposite direction. To the spectators, it looked like some sort of strange dance, two predators sizing each other up before battle. But Sheriff Bridgewater, who'd spent enough time around horses to recognize their moods, saw something else entirely. This wasn't preparation for conflict. This was communication. "What in the Sam Hill is he doing?" demanded Cornelius Fairweather, his voice cutting through the hushed atmosphere like a rusty blade. "Is he going to ride the beast or not?" But Ezekiel paid no attention to the crowd. His entire focus remained on Thunder's Revenge, who had begun to show signs of confusion. The stallion's aggressive posture gradually relaxed as he realized that this human posed no immediate threat. For the first time in months, Thunder's Revenge found himself genuinely curious about a member of the species he'd grown to despise. The circling continued for nearly 20 minutes, each participant gradually moving closer to the other. Ezekiel began to hum, a low, melodic sound that seemed to resonate with something deep in the horse's consciousness. It was an ancient song, passed down through generations of horsemen who understood that true partnership could never be forced, only invited. Thunder's Revenge stopped circling entirely and stood perfectly still in the center of the arena, his dark eyes fixed on Ezekiel with an expression that seemed almost human in its complexity. The horse was thinking, processing, trying to understand what made this man different from all the others who had tried to dominate him. Slowly, carefully, Ezekiel extended his hand, not reaching toward the horse, not trying to grab or control, but simply offering. Thunder's Revenge stared at the outstretched palm for what felt like an eternity before taking a single, cautious step forward. The crowd held its collective breath as the greatest test of wills in Copper Canyon County's history reached its crucial moment. Thunder's Revenge stretched his magnificent neck forward, nostrils flaring as he caught Ezekiel's scent. The man remained perfectly still, his hand extended in invitation rather than demand. When the stallion's velvet muzzle finally brushed against his palm, a visible shudder ran through the great horse's frame, not of fear, but of recognition. "You've been alone for so long," Ezekiel whispered, his voice carrying a note of profound sadness that seemed to resonate with something deep in Thunder's Revenge's soul. "Running from pain, from betrayal. I know that feeling, brother. I know it well." The horse's ears pricked forward at the unexpected empathy in the man's voice. Other humans had spoken to him before, but their words had been full of dominance and aggression, commands to submit, threats of punishment if he didn't comply. This was different. This was understanding. Sheriff Bridgewater watched in amazement as Ezekiel began to run his hands along Thunder's Revenge's neck, his touch gentle but confident. The stallion didn't flinch or pull away. Instead, he seemed to lean into the contact, as if he'd been starving for this kind of connection without even realizing it. "Look at his scars," Ezekiel called out to the sheriff, his voice carrying clearly, in the hushed arena. Look at the marks on his flanks. The old rope burns on his legs. This horse wasn't born wild. He was made wild by men who tried to break his spirit through cruelty. Indeed, now that he was close enough to examine the stallion properly, the evidence of abuse was unmistakable. Faint white lines crisscrossed Thunder's Revenge's coat, where spurs had been used with excessive force. His legs bore the telltale marks of ropes applied too tightly, too often. Most telling of all was a brand on his left shoulder. Not the neat mark of ownership, but a cruel, irregular burn that spoke of torture rather than identification. "Who would do such a thing?" Sheriff Bridgewater asked, his voice tight with anger. "Men who think power comes from fear," Ezekiel replied, never taking his eyes off the horse. "Men who believe that breaking something's spirit is the same as earning its respect." Thunder's Revenge whickered softly, a sound so quiet that only Ezekiel could hear it. But the message was unmistakable. The great stallion was telling his story, sharing the pain and betrayal that had driven him to reject all human contact. Ezekiel listened with his whole being, his hands continuing their gentle exploration of the horse's neck and shoulders. "You trusted once," he murmured. "You gave your heart to someone who betrayed it. So you decided never to trust again. But trust isn't weakness, brother. It's the greatest strength of all." The transformation was gradual but undeniable. Thunder's Revenge's rigid posture began to soften. His breathing became deeper and more regular. The wild, aggressive gleam in his eyes was replaced by something that looked almost like hope. For the first time in years, the great stallion was allowing himself to believe that not all humans were enemies. Ezekiel continued his patient work, his hands mapping every inch of the horse's powerful frame. He found old injuries that had never been properly treated, knots of tension that spoke of years of stress and fear. With each discovery, he murmured words of comfort and understanding, building a bridge of trust that spanned the chasm between two wounded souls. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the impossible unfolded before their eyes. This wasn't the violent struggle they'd expected. This was something far rarer and more precious. This was the moment when two beings chose to trust each other despite every reason not to. When Ezekiel finally placed his hand on Thunder's Revenge's back, the stallion didn't flinch. When he applied gentle pressure, asking rather than demanding, the proud horse actually lowered his head in submission. Not the forced submission of a broken animal, but the willing partnership of a creature who had chosen to trust again. "Now," Ezekiel whispered, "let's show them what real strength looks like." In one fluid motion that seemed to defy gravity itself, Ezekiel swung onto Thunder's Revenge's back. The crowd gasped, expecting the explosive violence that had marked every previous attempt, but the stallion stood rock-still beneath his rider. There was no bucking, no rearing, no desperate attempt to throw off the burden. Instead, Thunder's Revenge turned his head slightly, as if seeking confirmation that this partnership was real. Ezekiel's hands found the horse's mane, but he didn't grip it like a lifeline. His touch was gentle, communicative, speaking a language that transcended words. When he shifted his weight slightly forward, Thunder's Revenge responded immediately, walking with a grace and power that took everyone's breath away. "Impossible," breathed Cornelius Fairweather, his calculating mind struggling to process what he was witnessing. "No one has ever stayed on that devil for more than 3 seconds." But Sheriff Bridgewater understood that they weren't watching a conquest. They were witnessing a reunion between two spirits that belonged together. Ezekiel and Thunder's Revenge moved as one entity, their communication so subtle and perfect that it seemed supernatural. A slight shift in the rider's posture sent the stallion into a smooth trot. A gentle pressure from his legs brought them to a collected canter that showcased the horse's incredible athleticism. The arena fell away as horse and rider moved together in perfect harmony. Thunder's Revenge's hooves barely seemed to touch the ground as he flowed through gaits that revealed his true breeding. This was no common Mustang. This was a horse born from the finest bloodlines, trained by masters until cruelty had driven him to reject everything civilization offered. "Where did you come from, magnificent one?" Ezekiel whispered, and Thunder's Revenge's ears swiveled back to catch every word. "What's your real story?" As if in answer to his question, a commotion erupted at the edge of the arena. A well-dressed man in an expensive suit was pushing through the crowd, his face flushed with exertion and something that looked like panic. "Stop!" the stranger shouted. "Stop this immediately! That horse is stolen property!" Sheriff Bridgewater's hand instinctively moved to his weapon as the man approached. There was something about the newcomer that set his lawman's instincts on high alert. Perhaps it was the cruel set of his mouth, or the way his eyes held no warmth even when he tried to smile. "I'm Harrison Grimsby," the man announced, producing an official-looking document from his jacket. "That stallion belongs to me. He was stolen from my ranch in Colorado 3 months ago, and I've been tracking him ever since." Ezekiel brought Thunder's Revenge to a halt at the center of the arena, but he didn't dismount. The horse's entire demeanor had changed at the sound of Grimsby's voice. His muscles tensed, his breathing became shallow and rapid, and a low, threatening sound rumbled in his chest. "This horse knows you," Ezekiel observed, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. "And he's terrified." Grimsby's facade of civilized concern cracked slightly. "Nonsense. Midnight's always been high-spirited. He needs a firm hand, that's all." Midnight. Sheriff Bridgewater stepped forward, his badge catching the late afternoon sun. "That's not what we've been calling him." "His registered name is Midnight's Thunder," Grimsby insisted, waving his papers. "I have the bloodline certificates right here. He's worth over $100,000, and I demand his immediate return." But Thunder's Revenge, Midnight's Thunder, had begun to tremble beneath Ezekiel's gentle hands. The stallion's eyes rolled white with remembered terror, and foam appeared at the corners of his mouth. Whatever memories Grimsby's presence had triggered, they were clearly traumatic. Ezekiel's voice, when he finally spoke, was as cold as winter steel. "Sheriff, I suggest you examine those papers very carefully, because this horse bears the scars of systematic abuse, and something tells me Mr. Grimsby knows exactly how they got there." The confrontation that had been building all day was finally about to explode into the open, and everyone present sensed that more than just ownership of a horse was at stake. This was about justice, redemption, and the fundamental question of whether might truly made right. Sheriff Bridgewater examined Grimsby's documents with the careful eye of a man who'd seen his share of forgeries. The papers looked official enough, but something about them felt wrong, too clean, too new, as if they'd been prepared recently rather than maintained over years of ownership. "These certificates show purchase 6 months ago," the sheriff observed. "But you said the horse was stolen 3 months ago. That's an awfully short time to own such a valuable animal before losing him." Grimsby's face flushed red. "I don't appreciate your implications, Sheriff. That horse is my legal property, and I demand—" "You demand nothing in my county." Bridgewater cut him off sharply, especially not when the animal in question shows clear signs of abuse and becomes terrified at the sound of your voice. From atop Thunder's Revenge, Ezekiel watched the exchange with growing certainty. The horse beneath him continued to tremble, and with each passing moment, more details of the stallion's tragic story became clear. The precise nature of his scars, the way he'd flinched from certain movements, the desperate way he'd fought against any attempt at control, it all painted a picture of systematic cruelty. "Tell me, Mr. Grimsby," Ezekiel called out, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet arena. "What methods did you use to train this magnificent creature?" "Standard techniques," Grimsby replied evasively. "Nothing you couldn't find in any horse training manual." "Standard techniques," Grimsby replied evasively. "Nothing you couldn't find in any horse training manual." Standard techniques don't leave scars like these, Ezekiel countered, running his hand along a particularly prominent mark on Thunder's, Revenge's neck. This was done with a heated iron, wasn't it? Not for branding, but for punishment. The crowd began to murmur angrily as the implications sank in. These were people who lived and worked with horses daily, and they recognized the signs of abuse when they saw them. Cornelius Fairweather, despite his earlier bluster about the prize money, stepped forward with murder in his eyes. "If what you're suggesting is true," Fairweather said slowly, "then this man has committed crimes against nature itself." Grimsby must have sensed the shifting mood of the crowd, because his hand moved subtly toward the gun concealed beneath his jacket. But Sheriff Bridgewater had been watching for exactly that movement, and his own weapon appeared with practiced speed. "I wouldn't," the sheriff advised calmly. "Now, suppose you tell us the real story about how you came to own this horse." For a moment, it seemed as if Grimsby might try to brazen it out. But faced with a hostile crowd, an armed sheriff, and the growing weight of evidence against him, his composure finally cracked completely. "He was nothing when I bought him," Grimsby snarled, his mask of civility falling away to reveal the cruelty beneath. "A spoiled, pampered show horse who thought he was too good to work for his keep. I taught him what real discipline meant." Thunder's Revenge snorted and pawed the ground at the sound of that hateful voice, but Ezekiel's gentle touch kept him calm. The horse seemed to understand that his tormentor could no longer hurt him, that he was safe under his new rider's protection. "You didn't train him," Ezekiel said with quiet authority. "You tortured him. You broke his trust in humanity so completely that he chose to become wild rather than submit to your cruelty again. And when he escaped, you decided to let him run free for a while," Sheriff Bridgewater added, pieces of the puzzle falling into place. "Let him become a legend, build up his value through reputation. Then you'd swoop in with your forged papers and claim ownership of a horse worth far more than what you originally paid." Grimsby's silence was answer enough. The plan had been clever in its way. Wait for others to enhance the horse's value through failed attempts at capture, then appear as the rightful owner to claim a prize worth many times his original investment. But he hadn't counted on Ezekiel Crestwood, a man who spoke the language of wounded souls and understood that true strength came not from domination, but from trust freely given. "Take him away," Sheriff Bridgewater ordered, and 2 deputies stepped forward to place Grimsby under arrest. "We'll sort out the legal details later, but this horse stays right here until we do." As Grimsby was led away in handcuffs, Thunder's Revenge raised his head proudly and trumpeted a challenge that echoed across the canyon walls. For the first time in years, the magnificent stallion was truly free, not just from physical restraints, but from the emotional bonds of fear and hatred that had imprisoned his spirit. 3 months later, as autumn painted the canyon walls in brilliant shades of gold and crimson, Sheriff Bridgewater found himself riding out to the small spread that Ezekiel Crestwood had quietly purchased on the outskirts of town. The legal proceedings had been swift once the truth came out. Grimsby's forged papers fell apart under scrutiny, and his history of animal abuse had caught up with him in the form of a lengthy prison sentence. The horse officially known as Midnight's. Thunder, but still called Thunder's Revenge by most folks, had legally become Ezekiel's property when no legitimate owner could be found. The original breeder had died years earlier, and his records showed the stallion sold to a dealer who'd apparently passed him along to Grimsby through a chain of transactions designed to obscure the trail. As Bridgewater approached the modest ranch house, he saw Ezekiel working with a young mare in the corral, his movements patient and gentle. Thunder's Revenge grazed peacefully in the adjacent pasture, his coat gleaming with health and contentment. The transformation was remarkable. The savage, untouchable beast had become a noble stallion who radiated calm confidence. "Sheriff," Ezekiel called out, finishing his work with the mare before walking over to the fence. "Good to see you. How's the investigation going?" "Wrapped up yesterday," Bridgewater replied, dismounting and tipping his hat. Turns out Grimsby had a whole network of stolen and abused horses. Your Thunder's testimony, so to speak, helped us crack the case wide open. They both looked toward the stallion, who had lifted his head at the mention of his name. Thunder's Revenge trotted over to the fence, no longer the wild, aggressive creature who'd terrorized the county, but still every inch the magnificent animal who'd captured everyone's imagination. "He's been helping me with the other horses," Ezekiel explained, stroking the stallion's neck. "Amazing how quickly they calm down when they see that he trusts me. He's become quite the teacher." Indeed, word had spread throughout the region about Ezekiel's unique gift for healing traumatized horses. Ranchers from hundreds of miles away had begun bringing their problem animals to the quiet man, who seemed to speak directly to their souls. The ranch was becoming something of a sanctuary for horses that others had given up on. "There's something else," Sheriff Bridgewater said, producing an envelope from his jacket. "Cornelius Fairweather wanted me to give you this." Ezekiel opened the envelope to find a check for $50,000, the prize money that had been offered for anyone who could ride Thunder's Revenge. "I can't accept this," Ezekiel said immediately. "That wasn't a contest. That was just understanding." "Fairweather figured you'd say that," Bridgewater chuckled. "That's why he made it out to the Thunder's Revenge Horse Sanctuary. He suggested, you use it to help more animals like our friend here." Thunder's Revenge whickered softly, as if approving of the plan. Ezekiel folded the check carefully and tucked it into his shirt pocket, his weathered face creased with something that might have been the beginning of a smile, as the sun set behind. The canyon walls, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, the three companions stood together in comfortable silence. The wild horse, who had refused all riders, had found his perfect match in a man who understood that the greatest victories came not from conquest, but from connection. Thunder's Revenge turned his magnificent head toward the horizon, where other horses ran free in the gathering dusk. But he made no move to join them. He had found something more valuable than freedom. He had found home. And in the growing twilight, as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, the legendary stallion and his quiet companion began planning for all the wounded souls they would heal together, one gentle whisper at a time.